Good afternoon. I'm Cathy Gale from Resolve Conflict Family Lawyers. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people, the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Nicholes Family Lawyers and Resolve Conflict Family Lawyers acknowledge and pay their respects to the past, present and future traditional custodians and elders of this nation, and the continuation of cultural, spiritual and educational practices of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Now today, we're here to talk about whether you can have a good separation, a good relationship breakdown, a good divorce. Our panel is going to be talking about whether that's possible, and if it is possible, how to do it. And I'd like to have our panel introduce themselves before we go any further.
Thanks, Cathy. My name's Nadine Udorovic. I'm one of the partners here at Nicholes Family Lawyers. I'm also a collaboratively trained lawyer, and I have a real focus and emphasis on helping my clients resolve their family law disputes and mediate outcomes using various alternative dispute resolution tools, one of which in particular we'll be talking about today.
Thanks, Nadine. My name is Laura Scott, and I'm an associate at Resolve Conflict Family Lawyers and Mediators. And I have a real interest in assisting couples to have respectful discussions in relation to their parenting and property matters.
My name's Rebecca Dahl, and I'm a partner here at Nicholes Family Lawyers as well. Much like everyone else, I really do relish being able to help people separate in this respectful way. I also do work with the rainbow community, the LGBTIQA plus community and rainbow families, and also working with them through these processes as well.
Thanks, everybody. And I'm Cathy Gale, a Director of Resolve Conflict, Family Lawyers and Mediators. And like everybody else here, our team is very focused on helping people reach respectful solutions often in a non-adversarial, non-tactical way outside of the court processes. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, we might just start with a bit of fun. Beck has a little quick quiz about relationships in Australia, so I'll pass over to Beck.
Thanks, Cathy. I thought it would be a bit of fun to start with a quiz, so hopefully you've all got some paper or a pen there. So the first question is, true or false, the number of marriages in Australia is decreasing? What do you think, Nadine?
I would say that is probably false.
And I would say you are probably incorrect. It's actually true. In 2020, there were 78,989 marriages registered in Australia, which was a 30% decrease from 2009. As family lawyers, though, we know that marriage isn't the determining factor of a relationship or a family, and there's lots of people who live in de facto or other family situations, but it is an interesting statistic. Question 2. Also in Australia, are there fewer marriages and fewer divorces, or fewer marriages and more divorces between 1960 and 2022? Nadine, I'm going to put you on the spot again.
I would say B, Beck, fewer marriages and more divorces.
Well, you've got that one right. Well done, Nads. There were, in fact, in 1960, for 1,000 people, there was 80 marriages and 1 divorce. And in 2022, that statistic was 4 marriages and 2 divorces. So I hope you're doing as well as Nadine. Question 3. In Australia, what is the average length of a marriage? Is it 25 years, 5 years, or 12 years?
Another one?
Yeah, no, they're all for you, I've decided.
I would say it's definitely either B or C, and I'll probably go with C.
And again, you would be correct.
Oh,
winner, Nads. No, in Australia, the average length of a marriage is 12.3 years. Interestingly, in the US, it's only 8 years. And in Germany, it's nearly 15 years. So we're about middle in Australia, I think. Question 4 is, what is the most popular reason people give for divorce? Is it a lack of commitment, a lack of equality, they got married too young, or infidelity?
Over to me again.
Always.
I would probably say D.
Ooh, no. Surprisingly. 73% responded to that question saying a lack of commitment was the most popular reason that they separated, followed by excessive arguing, and infidelity came in third. Question 5 is, what is the proportion of same-sex marriages in Australia? Is it 10.7%, 13.8%, or 3.7%?
I'd probably say C, 3.7%.
It is, but keeping in mind that same-sex marriage has only quite recently become legal in Australia, I'm sure that statistic will grow. And the last question is, how long does the average divorce take after 12 months of separation? Is it 12 months or 4 months?
I would say A, 12 months.
Well, funnily enough, you're wrong. Okay. It usually takes 4 months from the date you file the first application with divorce from the court. But that being said, it's not always, divorce isn't the only thing. Often, we work with people that have complex parenting and property things, but the divorce itself usually 4 months. So it's a nice little introduction and fun, and I'll hand over to you, Nadine.
Okay, thank you, Beck. So in the hands of the right legal and other professional experts, and with the right outlook and state of mind, you and your partner can reach an amicable, forward-looking and legally binding outcome on your relationship breakdown, which is essentially what we will be talking about today. So by deploying tools such as the Our Family in Two Homes concept, which we will be discussing today in detail, you can treat the separation process as an investment in your future, both for you and your family, and hopefully avoid the trauma of litigation. Some couples succeed in conducting their parenting and financial discussions in a respectful and courteous way, whilst also prioritising the needs of their family, their children and themselves. So how do they do that? Well, that's what we're here to talk about today. You might say, but I still need legal advice. I want to know my rights and I don't want to be taken to the cleaners. Or I want to make sure that the children have an opportunity to spend plenty of time in my care. Well, all of that may be achievable. The success or failure, however, may depend on making sure that you have chosen the right process for your journey. And the process that we're talking about today is Our Family in Two Homes. So you'll need to find a lawyer who is focused on being part of the solution rather than part of the problem. We're very excited to introduce a brand new product to you today, which currently is exclusive to Nicholes Family Lawyers and Resolve Conflict here in Melbourne. So essentially, the Our Family in Two Homes workbook is designed to empower parties who are going through a relationship separation to not only self-reflect on what is important to them and their family, but also provides you with practical legal information. So it assists you, your lawyer, and the other party to identify your goals and values and ensures that your priorities are at the forefront of your decision-making. So essentially with the workbook, it would be given to you by your lawyer at the beginning of discussions. You would take it away with you. You would complete the first 13 pages of the workbook. You don't need to show the workbook to your lawyer or to the other party. You keep that to yourself. But the first 13 pages essentially discuss things such as communication with your former partner, trust, core values, decision-making, how you express yourself, conflict styles, so that by the end of the completion of the first 13 pages, you've got a really good summary of how you would like to move forward in the separation process. So just again, you won't be asked to hand in the workbook. You will keep completing that throughout the negotiations. And then the workbook goes on to talk more specifically about parenting matters that concern children, all facets of decision-making for children, such as time spent arrangements, schooling issues, religion, etc. It also talks about financial matters, so core values, what your core values are when coming to financial arrangements, what is important to you, your family, what concerns you, what are you worried about financially. So preparation for difficult financial discussions, talking about matters such as child support, spousal maintenance, estate matters, financial budgets, and dealing with debt. So the workbooks are designed to give you complete control of the process at your speed, but also help you understand the law, but more importantly, to make the right choice for you and your family.
Is this all too good to be true? Well, this is a different way of lawyering. It's not the traditional old-fashioned way of each party getting a lawyer and then each lawyer going into bat for their client in a win-lose, tug-of-war, adversarial process. I think the first really important thing to understand here is that the process has an educational component. And before we start the lawyering process, the workbooks support each party to learn about their own communication style, their own conflict resolution style, to really focus on what's important to me, what are the goals for my family, how could I achieve those, what's negotiable, what's not negotiable for me, what are my cares or my worries as we move through this process. And by using the workbooks, each of the lawyers is going to identify all of those things and have conversations with you around those things at the start of your matter. And I'd suggest that that's a really good place to start. Now, this process was developed by a lawyer in Canada. And and she was a mediator and a collaborative lawyer and has worked for many, many years with couples to help them to have a respectful discussion around when their relationship fails, how to develop their parenting plans, how to separate their finances, who gets which bits of furniture in the house, what does the child support arrangements look like for the future. So all of this is possible. It has spread and is being widely used in Canada now, also in America and in the UK. And Nicholes Family Law and Resolve Conflict Family Lawyers are very proud to be bringing this process to Australia for the benefit of couples going through a separation. So each party will still have their own lawyers, obviously, will have the benefit of legal advice, but in a much more constructive framework. If you reach an agreement, will it hold up? Well, yes, your lawyers, once agreement is reached, your lawyers will do all the necessary documents, be they consent orders or a binding financial agreement, a parenting plan, a child support agreement, whatever is needed to ensure that your agreement sticks, to make sure that whatever you've agreed to is legally binding and enforceable and provides a really good pathway forward for each of you and your children. What happens if you don't reach agreement? Well, if you don't reach agreement, you can still continue on with your existing lawyers who can assist you through other more traditional processes, such as mediation, family dispute resolution, and in a worst-case scenario, going to court. Both of our law firms have all of those skills and do lots of that work, but the four of us are committed to trying to show the community that there is a better way. Now, I'm going to pass over to Nadine to just talk about the fact that our family empowers new family arrangements.
What really struck us when we became a part of this system is that it was almost like the system looked at all the issues that people have with the traditional family law system and found a way to develop them. And so one of the things we often hear from our clients is that they feel a lack of control. They feel a lack of control over the process and what's going on. These are very personal, very emotional decisions, and people feel as though they're getting pulled out of their hands. What this Our Family in Two Homes program allows people to do is control the process and control the conversation. It's about what's important to you, your partner, and your family, and you keep control of that. The other area that people often feel really stressed and concerned about in the traditional family law system is that they're constricted by the timetable of the court and the timetable of the system. When people are working through our family in two homes, they have the flexibility as a couple or an ex-couple to really work through this at their own pace. And the really important thing that comes out of this is that people can walk away with relationships which, although they might not be together anymore, they can retain that respect. They haven't been in a courtroom feeling like they have to say the worst possible things about each other and ripping everything apart from the heart of their relationship and their family. They can keep that respect, keep that dignity, and particularly for people with children, they can really walk away from the process knowing that they've got a relationship that they can help manage their family ongoing. And those are lifelong lessons. They're not just lessons for part of this process. We aim to help people through this separation and out the other side.
Thank you, Beck. So just touching on the key elements of an outcome-focused and positive separation, and I guess the overall overarching key principles from the Our Family in Two Homes concept is that parties feel empowered. They really feel like they've taken the decision-making into their own hands. And unlike, often through the court process where the decisions are completely out of their control, this process allows them to 100% and totally feel empowered and feel in control and be at the forefront of the decision-making for themselves, but for their children and for the whole family unit. It allows the parties to operate in a space of feeling respected with each other, with their lawyers. They feel heard. They have an opportunity to really discuss face-to-face with the other party and their lawyers how they're feeling, what they're upset about, how they want the future to look for themselves and their children. And ultimately, it allows them to just together develop an outcome that works for their family for the here and now and going forward. And that's really, really important. And we see that it retains a relationship between the parties in the family unit in a much different way than what you would typically see in cases where, the court is involved and the parties are not talking to one another. They're having no contact with each other. The lawyers are not always having the same type of contact with each other either, unlike this process. And ultimately then at the conclusion, we see that our clients have retained dignity and also, fantastic role modelling if they've got children so that they are able to continue to co-parent effectively together into the future. And often that looks like, many years ahead of them, especially where you may have, very young children at the outset of a separation or relationship breakdown. So look, ultimately they are really our overarching key principles, which, the four of us bring into our everyday practice and is absolutely how we operate as family lawyers.
And the next slide that we're looking at talks about a cooperative and compromise-driven solution and what might be involved in that. I agree wholeheartedly with Nadine that where you're a parent, that's a lifetime commitment. And for us as lawyers, we don't want to be throwing fuel on the fire. We don't want to be damaging your relationship any further. So often we hear from our clients, we don't want to get lawyers involved because they just make things worse. We don't want to go to court because we lose control, because it's expensive, and we mightn't like the decision. So what we're trying to do here in this process is to be solution-focused. The lawyers, but also the clients, instead of waging war, become part of a solution-focused process. Being solution-focused, of course, means taking responsibility for your outcomes. And the workbooks assist you to do that. They provide a roadmap how can I take control? How can I take responsibility for my outcomes? And in the start of the workbooks, some of the work that the clients will do is really to understand their core values. What drives us in life? Is it honesty, integrity? Is it compassion? Is it kindness? Is it career? Is it family? What are the things that are the drivers for each member of this couple? And how do they impact the way that we make decisions? How do they impact how we define what is important? And so if your aim is to be co-parents for life with your partner and not to damage your children in the process of separation or relationship breakdown, and that to provide positive role models for your children for the future, the workbook, Our Family in Two Homes, supports and assists you in that process, very much unlike a traditional lawyer-client model and totally foreign to a court model, okay, a completely different process. So for those of you who are prepared to sit around the table, who want to have respectful conversations, who value your future parenting relationship, or if you don't have children, just want to separate in an amicable, peaceful and respectful way and reach conclusions and agreements in that way, then this is the right process for you. If you want to be part of the solution, the Our Family in Two Homes workbook is a terrific solution-focused process to get you to where you want to be. Now, I think we're going to move to some tasters of how this works. And the first one is conflict management. One of the things to prepare the clients to have those conversations with each other is we need to look at our communication style. And when we look at our communication style, we do that through the workbooks. How do we resolve conflict? When we've had a big blue with our partner, how did it all work out in the end? What happened? How did we sort it out? Okay. So have a look at the questions which appear on the slide and just jot down your answers. The first question, and these are some examples of things that clients might work through as they're going through the workbooks. So when you have a difficult subject to discuss with your partner, what's your approach? Do you run and hide? Ostrich mentality, head in the sand, pretend it's not there? Do you address it head on and argue fiercely for your perspective and your point of view? Or do you address it in a way that enables the other party to be heard? So there's a little bit of sort of reflective work in there about what is my conflict resolution style and is it helpful? Are there things that I could do to improve the way that I communicate when I'm in conflict? Question 2 is how would you and your ex-partner answer question 1 for you, and what's the impact on them of the way you handle conflict? So in other words, another reflection exercise. How does the way I handle conflict impact my ex? How do they feel? If I'm sort of defensive or belligerent or argumentative, what's the impact on them? Is there another way of communicating what I need to say without provoking that reaction in them? And then what sort of communication style and conflict management styles will work best in my family after relationship breakdown? And really, by using the workbook, it's empowering us to look and reflect on our own communication and conflict resolution style. This is not a typical legal approach. This is not the way that lawyers generally engage with their clients. So it is a very different way of assisting people to reach respectful solutions.
The other thing that we work through with clients in the workbook is decision making. And decisions are something we have to make every day. I think that people have to make them as part of the separation process. As lawyers, we're constantly asking people to make decisions. And then once people are separated, particularly if they have children, there's decisions they're going to have to make with each other moving forward. So again, as a taster from the workbook, one of the things we look at is what's your go-to style of decision making? Is it instinctive? Do you trust your gut? Is it consultative? You like to ask other people, gather their opinions and then make a decision? Is it research-based? Do you look at facts and the internet and all those sorts of things? Is it values-based? Are your values the most important thing when you're making the decision? Or do you seek the advice of a clairvoyant? No wrong answers. So everyone has a different style of decision-making, and I suspect that if you're watching our presentation today, one of those has ticked the box for you. I know that for me, I'm consultative. I like to ask everyone I've ever met before I ask a decision, but everyone's different. And I think that when you're walking through the Our Family in Two Homes workbook, this is such a different process to a family court where your lawyer would say, okay, these are the decisions you're going to make. This is how you make them. We talk about parental responsibility and all those sorts of things, but we talk about the fact of the decision-making, not the how and the why, which goes to question 2 and really looking at how your ex-partner would answer those questions about your decision-making. Because if you're someone like me who's consultative and you're trying to make decisions with a co-parent who's instinctive and likes to go for it, chances are there's going to be some disharmony there. So this process, again, allows you an opportunity that the court just doesn't, to look at yourself, look at the other person and think about how those styles can make a decision. And then also one of the other things we look at there, which Nadine's going to expand on a bit further, is trust. Trust really is going to underplay a lot of these decisions moving forward. And again, such an amazing opportunity for couples to be able to go through all these things at their own pace, in their own time, in a way that's important for them, and set them up for really good decision-making processes moving forward.
Thanks, Beck. So looking at trust now, trust is, one thing that I often see is at the forefront of discussions that I, have with many clients about how the trust is broken down in the relationship, and it could be for various different reasons. But it's often the number one, underlying cause that parties can't come together and reach an agreement, and often a matter will go through the court system or it will continue on for months, years, a long time before parties are actually able to come to a decision. And that is because ultimately the trust has broken down. So again, looking at a bit of a taster from the Our Family in Two Homes workbook, question number 1, and jot down your answers here. So when looking at the concept of trust, what do you prioritise as the top 3? Is it boundaries? Is it accountability? Is it honesty? Honesty for me probably is at the top of my list in terms of what I often talk to, with my clients. Is it generosity? Is it privacy, reliability, balance, time, cooperation, care, or character? And I think, if we're focused on looking at honesty, for example, looking at how, honesty and, how that, impacts the trust that's broken down between parties, looking at then the impact of how honesty and what goes into that and not being honest, whether it's with respect to a decision that's to be made for the children, for example, or whether it's a financial decision, or honesty in the sense of, being open and transparent about, what may have occurred or something to do with a financial matter or providing financial documents, all of that in terms of honesty, looking at the impact on the other party and then ultimately if there are children involved. So for me, I think when we're talking about trust, honesty is a real big one there. So moving on to question 2. So when looking at that concept of trust, what do you think that your partner would prioritise as the top 3? And I think that's one thing that really stands out when you're working through the workbook is the two parties being able to look at the concept of trust and why that's broken down and how it's going to be repaired. The parties can work through that section of the workbook and come back together and see whether or not their top three priorities when looking at the concept of trust, can they get on the same page, and do they have the same priorities in terms of rebuilding some trust in their relationship to move forward into the future. And then question number 3, do you think trust is all or nothing? I presume that, for most of you that are listening, it probably is all. And we often see that when we're, talking to our clients, that trust is just a huge issue, especially, with families and children, but also when parties are having to make lifelong decisions in respect to their family and their financial matters, that trust between the parties when they're having to make that decision is absolute key. And so it is certainly something that I think working through the elements of the workbook that touch on that, I think are absolutely critical and key, and I think very, very helpful for parties who are working through this process. Okay, so now we're going to move on and we're going to talk to you about a couple of case studies and then drawing them back to the workbook. So I'll be looking at a parenting case study. So up on the screen, we've got a bit of a snapshot of what that looks like. So parents have recently separated. There are 2 children aged 5 and 10. Mum has typically been the primary carer and dad the primary breadwinner. And the parties have quite different parenting styles, which is often the case. So both parties want time with the children, understandably, both during the school terms and the school holidays. Mum wants to retain primary care of the children, and ultimately in that, decision-making around medical issues, travel, and the use of electronic devices for the children, as she's always been the primary carer, and ultimately, fundamentally, at the forefront of making those decisions. But Dad, now that they're separated, wants to be actively involved in the children's day-to-day lives and decision-making, and sees this as an opportunity to really step up and become quite hands-on with the children. Mum has, concerns that Dad's ability to parent is a bit questionable because he's not spent so much time alone with the children that she has. And they have differing views on what the children can do as a result of the fact that they're still quite young. And Dad also has family that reside overseas. So when looking at the workbooks and how we bring the workbook into assisting parties who might have a parenting issue, so one of the first things that we do is we identify what's important to the parties, and what the parties were able to identify here in terms of what it was important to them. For Mum, it was very important that she retain primary care, especially during the school terms. And, due to the young ages of the children, she wanted to make sure that they had a stable home base, particularly during the school terms. For Dad, what was important for him was that he was able to spend some quality time with the children, and longer chunks of time, particularly during the school holidays as a result of his work commitments during the school term. But he also, for him, was really important that he was able to take the children overseas to see his family. And typically during the relationship, the parties had done that together. But now that they'd separated, Mum was feeling quite anxious about the fact that Dad was wanting to take the children overseas without her. So working through the workbook, both parties identified what was important to each other. Then they identified their parenting concerns, and Mum's concern was really because Dad hadn't spent so much time with the children during the school terms. Was he going to be able to do that on his own? Would the children spend too much time in before school care or after school care? And how would that impact the children? Would Dad have the kids on electronic devices for too long because he may have had work commitments that he had to keep up with when he had the children with him? So the parties were able to identify their individual parenting concerns, drawing out specific questions from the workbook. Then they were able to come together and actually identify their common interests, their common values, and their common goals. And they actually found that they had quite a lot. when they worked through that part of the workbook. So, they both wanted to spend as much time as possible with the children, but also it was important to both of them that the children were able to go on and maintain relationships with extended family, whether that be, in Australia or overseas, for argument's sake. And it was important to both parents that they were able to feel engaged and attend, important events for the children, whether it be social, personal, school, whatever that might be. So they really were able to sit down and look, even though we're separating and we might have very different parenting styles and we might have different views on, the use of an iPad or whatever it might be, fundamentally they were able to actually see that they had quite a few common interests and common goals. And then looking at, they were able to then work through and come to an agreement that they were both happy with and that they could both live with. And that's really important, being able to reach an agreement that they've both come to themselves. They can move forward, into the future. They've agreed to it. There isn't some external third party like a judge who they don't know, who's never met the children, that's really never met them other than maybe seeing them at the back of the courtroom, making a lifelong decision for their family and their children. This is a process where they fundamentally control the outcome. You know your children better than anybody. I often say that to my clients, and I very much believe it. So in this case, as a bit of an example, just looking at the travel, for example, overseas, Mum started feeling quite anxious about Dad taking the children to New Zealand to see family without her because she'd typically been on those trips. So they agreed that, look, given that there was a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old, let's agree to one trip a year during the long summer school holidays for 7 days or a week only. But then when the younger child turned 10, so give it 5 years, they agreed that, look, it would be appropriate then with a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old that Dad be able to have 2 trips overseas each year to see his family. So it was just a really good example of how they may have thought that they started quite differently and had a bit of a clear division in terms of what they wanted, but they were ultimately using the elements and the questions and the key principles from the workbook. They were able to actually come to a really amicable, agreeable outcome for themselves that ultimately benefited their children. So it's just an example for you in terms of how we've used that in regards to a parenting matter.
I think I'll just give a bit of a brief description or example of how you can use the workbook in a property and asset split. So in this example, we've got Janet and John, who both grew up in Melbourne, and they owned their family home in Camberwell. 5 years ago, however, they relocated to Brisbane with their 2 children who were 7 and 9 years old. And the reason for that relocation was for John's work. Janet and John have now separated, and Janet has moved back to Melbourne into the Camberwell home with the children. Now, Janet did have a good job in Brisbane. However, moving back to Melbourne, she's actually currently unemployed at the moment. However, John still earns $200,000 a year plus superannuation at his job in Brisbane. So the major assets of the relationship are the Camberwell home and John's superannuation. Janet wants to retain the Camberwell property. John, however, is worried that if Janet keeps the home, he'll be left with nothing but his superannuation. So again, using the workbook to try and help this couple reach a resolution that they can both live with. The first thing really was to identify what was important to both Janet and John. Now for Janet, what was important to her was having a stable base for the children, close to extended family, and all the extended family were in Melbourne. John, on the other hand, he wanted to be able to purchase another home, so he needed a deposit to be able to do that. And he also wanted a home so the children could come and see him. He wasn't sure how long he was going to be in Brisbane for, so he needed, to be able to buy a home there with enough room for them to be able to travel up and visit him. The next step was to identify their financial worries and concerns. For Janet, a big concern for her was that she wasn't employed. So, for her to be able to have to retain the house and to pay John that was really concerning for her. John, on the other hand, needed the deposit. He wanted to buy a home. He wanted to set himself up and have a stable home. But he also wanted the children to have a stable home wherever they were going to be primarily living. So by going through that process, it was clear that both of them really wanted the children to have a stable home around their extended family. So it was a really good base to be able to work off for both of them to be able to reach an agreement that prioritised both of their needs. So essentially the agreement came down to Janet and the children continuing to live in the Camberwell home and pay John an agreed amount, but within 2 years, giving her some breathing space and some time to re-enter the workforce and obtain a mortgage. Now, the payment to John was reduced on the basis that John would keep 100% of his superannuation. Now, if Janet couldn't raise the mortgage in 2 years, the Camberwell home would be sold and John would be paid from the proceeds of sale. But you can see here in this example that there was a different process in getting there, and the agreement worked for both of Janet and John and the children.
And I think in getting to that agreement, one of the things that the Our Family in Two Homes workbook really supported was it helped both parties to identify what was important, and it identified a bunch of shared goals which they had for their children. And so starting from that agreement around wanting to provide a home for children, understanding the importance of extended family, also understanding the importance of John also being able to provide a home in Brisbane so that children could come and stay in school holiday times and other times. When the parties acknowledged and as they worked through the workbooks agreed about these items, we had a really strong basis from which to start looking at options for how we might agree to something that was going to be acceptable to both of them.
I really wanted to touch on how rainbow families and members of the LGBTIQA plus community can work with this workbook, because one of the beautiful things I find in my work with those families is that the concept of families is growing and changing. And whilst the book's called Our Family in Two Homes, it might be Our Family in 3 homes, 4 homes, or even more. And unfortunately, the law doesn't always keep up with those movements in family dynamics. So this example, there's 2 dads who have 3 children. Their surrogate mother and the egg donor are also involved in the children's lives. The children know them as their mums and want to retain a relationship with them and involvement in their lives. And so it might be that if these people went to court, the court system would be looking very strictly at making decisions, who makes the decisions, who has parental responsibility. But what these 4 people did was they all worked through the process together. They identified as a group what their concerns were. And by going through those activities we looked at earlier, a lot of things they were able to really work through, because what became clear was that a lot of it was based on fear. So the mums were really worried that they weren't the legal parents of the children. Would they be able to see them? The non-biological father was nervous about that. The biological father was worried about how to fix these things for the kids. And they were really able to go through a process where those fears were identified and help them make the decisions. And then also what was really important to this group of people was that even though they acknowledged there was legal parents of the children who could make decisions for them, it was really important for them to have a process where all 4 of them could have some input. And again, by working through the workbook, they were able to own a solution in their own time that worked for them and their children. So it's such a powerful tool when things may not fit in the black and white system of the court. So great option for rainbow families as well.
Thank you, everybody. And in a few minutes, we might just take some questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. But a recording from today's webinar will be on our respective websites, as well as some further information about how the workbooks can be used. I think Nicholes Family Law and Resolve Conflict Family Lawyers are very proud to be able to bring this new solution-focused option to the table and assist couples to reach agreement in a constructive, respectful and peaceful manner. Just for your information, there's also another workbook soon to be launched. I'm holding it up here, which says Designing Our Future Together. Sometimes in family law, people are entering into new relationships, and that might be in midlife. They might have had a relationship breakdown, they've met a new partner, and they're bringing assets into that relationship. And often the question is, well, what happens if we separate? It's all good now, but what happens in the future? And again, it's not necessary to enter into an adversarial process. We don't have to have an argument about how we're going to divide our money or our assets in the future. If we do separate, again, we can use a workbook which is Designing Our Future Together in a positive and constructive way to assist couples to reach durable solutions which really lay a very firm foundation for the future of their relationship. So there will also be information on our respective websites about designing our future together for those couples wanting to enter into a prenuptial or relationship agreement to agree on how they would organise and divide their financial resources. Now, I'm not sure if we have any questions. So nothing so far. So if there are no further questions, or there's no questions, is there anything that anybody else would like to add before we wrap up?
No, thanks, Cathy. Just, look, I hope you found it informative. We're very excited to present to you today and really looking forward to bringing this to the Melbourne market. And thanks to Damien, who says no questions, but thank you for your presentation. It's been our pleasure. So thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.